The civil wrong, tort law, introduction to law, political science 203, law and jurisprudence program. Well, before we get into what is tort law, we have to distinguish it from criminal law. We haven't gotten into criminal law yet, but obviously a crime is committed against a person or persons. But in the case of a crime, the offense is against the state, and the state will bring legal action, criminal action, on behalf of the persons or persons who are the victim. In civil law, tort takes its place. It's action by an individual against another individual, a perpetrator or one who is liable for the tort against the person who is harmed. So we're going to be kind of changing the tune around a little bit, the wording around a little bit, but just bear with me. All will be understandable soon. Now, when dealing with tort, we have three very general tort categories. The three categories of tort include intentional tort. Now, when you listen to intentional tort or read cases about intentional tort, they're going to sound the most like crime because the focus is on the intent of the tortfeasor, just a fancy legal way of saying the person who is liable, the person who's harmed someone else, the tortfeasor. And yes, to keep it simple for lawyers and judges, the victim or the person who is harmed by the tort is the tortfeasee, employer, employee, tortfeasor, tortfeasee. And the focus is on the intent of the tortfeasor. What did he or she mean to do? What was their intent? Remember, not their motive, but their intent. And what we call it, another legal term we like to kick around, is prima facie. I once asked a student what is prima facie, and he said it was a name of a pizza place in downtown Buffalo. Now, that would be a great name for a pizza place in downtown Buffalo. Right on Court Street, we can make $1 million. But since we've already talked about copyright, trademark, and patent, I want to really trademark that, okay? So read copyright or trademark, all right? Prima facie. Now, the prima facie showing of a tort are the critical elements. The critical elements that you need to prove to show that the tort existed, that it happened, okay? And they're critical elements for each of the intentional torts. A second general category is what most people think of as tort, and that is negligent tort. The focus here is on the tortfeasor's duty of care, what he or she should have done as a reasonable person. Okay, we're going to talk about all these terms in the mix here. But the duty of care, meaning we have a duty to others. Our primary duty in tort is to ourselves. Let's not forget that. In the common law, the primary duty was to ourselves. But we're also talking about other groups and parties that we might become required to show due care to. Okay? So the reasonable person standard, and we're going to find out more about this reasonable person standard, and it's all based on experience, age, abilities, training, certification, right? So you have the reasonable nurse, you have the reasonable doctor, you have the reasonable Joe Schmo who knows nothing about medicine, okay? Each of them bear their own standard. So it's a variable standard depending on age and all those other things, certification and training. The final tort category is strict liability tort. This is where they say the facts speak for themselves. We'll find out the fancy term is res ipsa loquitur. The facts speak for themselves. In strict liability tort, which is a very narrow area, it involves a lot of product liability issues, but it also involves ultra hazardous activities like dynamite, fireworks, vicious dogs. And yes, we have a category in New York of 4 vicious dogs. The one bite rule applies. We'll learn all about this, okay? So in strict liability, there's no need to show intent, like intentional tort, nor the tortfeasor's duty of care, like in negligent tort. All you have to prove is that it happened. The action happened. The dynamite exploded. The dog bit, you know? And because of that, the person is liable. The tortfeasor in this case is liable. Okay? Now, let's look at some of the laws of tort generally. And the first I want to confront are the basic questions and concerns in tort law. Perhaps the greatest one is, who caused the harm or damage? That's, sometimes evident, sometimes it's not evident. Sometimes we have what we'll call later proximate cause, where A caused harm to B, which in turn caused the harm to C. Okay, so we have a linkage between A, B, and C. Okay, now one thing we know is that if it's out of the control of any one person or persons, we call that an act of God. And you can't sue God, okay? You could try, and it has been attempted. You could look it up in Google. There's been attempts to sue God. Trust me, he or she or whatever your inclination is, cannot be sued. So if it's out of control of any one person or persons, it's an act of God. So if you're walking out in an open field and lightning strikes you, you got no one to blame but yourself. Oh, well, and God. But you don't want to go around blaming God. And I'm not going to get into the religious significance of that. You have enough religious studies and philosophy courses to take care of that. Now, we're going to deal with a case when we get back together called proximate cause. This is also known as legal cause. Okay? And this is where we see a linkage between the actions of A causing, maybe through the actions of B, the harm to C. So if I go up and slug somebody in class for no apparent reason, and not that I'm thinking of anyone in particular, and their tooth goes flying out and takes out the eye of another student, who am I liable for? Well, I'm liable for both of them. But for, and this is the test that will be used, but for me striking the one student, the tooth wouldn't have been propelled out of their mouths into the eye of another. So we call it the but-for test. But trust me, we're going to look at this in much greater detail soon. Second really general question then, category-wise, is there harm or damage? And more importantly, how do you measure harm? Well, lawyers are blamed typically being ambulance chasers. And in this case, we should chase some ambulances, okay? And figure out their motives and the like. So how do you measure harm? Well, obviously, doctor bills are a good measurement of harm, or psychiatric bills are a good measure of harm, or hospital bills, right? But there's also other, like whiplash. Whiplash is used quite often in court because it doesn't show up on an x-ray. And quite frankly, I didn't really believe in whiplash until I got, T-boned. My car was T-boned on Grand Island. And I was fine. Next day, I'm going, no whiplash. By the end of that second day, though, oh my God, whiplash, right? Your whole body, and some of you could attest to this, your whole body feels like God picked you up and shook you really hard. So all your ligaments and tendons and muscles, you're suffering from it, trust me. And I could testify to all of you right now, there is whiplash, okay? I believe, oh God do I believe. But there's other forms of damage that you could try to prove in court. Blurriness of vision, sleeplessness, panic attacks, loss of sexual performance, shakiness, chronic nausea, dizziness. All of these are really good examples of ways to measure harm. Now, we have some really fun terminology in tort law, and that's why I probably prefer it the most. And one of my favorite is the eggshell skull or the eggshell head. Okay? This basic concept in tort law, you could relate it to the proverb, you take your victim as you find them. In other words, all pre-existing conditions that you weren't aware of even, if you aggravated them, you're liable. Okay? So if the person, for instance, I don't know, their whole family blew up while they were getting off the school bus. So they have a dread of extremely loud noises. And if they hear a loud noise, they go catatonic, right? They start moaning, salivating on themselves, whatever. And you go up behind them, ha ha ha, with a lunch bag or something, a plastic bag, blow it up and pop it, and all of a sudden the person has to be taken to ECMC or St. Mary's Hospital. You're liable. You take your victim as you find them, as if their skull was made as paper thin as an eggshell. So you can't forget that. You can't forget these terms. And I didn't make them up. How could I? They're phenomenal though, right? The eggshell head or the eggshell skull. You take your victim as you find them. A final basic concern I want to talk about at this point is, should there have been due care? Should you have shown due care? And this is where we run into that reasonable person standard. This is why common law and the creation of tort, which is almost exclusively an American creation, out of all the areas of law we're going to deal with this year, tort law was basically created in the United States and is a dominant area of litigation, more so than any other country on earth. So USA, cheer, cheer, whatever. It's America, okay? And the reasonable person standard is that a variable standard where you look at the tortfeasor's certification, training, schooling, look at their age, look at their physical or mental abilities, to set what a reasonable person would have done. So say you're drowning in a pool and the only other person poolside is a blind person. They have no EMT training, they're not a lifeguard, right? So you would measure the reasonable person as what would the reasonable, otherwise able person who is blind respond. Now obviously the bottom, the base, the foundation of a reasonable person is to get help, okay? Get help. If you remember the last couple episodes of Seinfeld, it was all about the Good Samaritan obligation, right? Where they landed their plane and they were looking and they were laughing as the one gentleman was mugged. Well, sadly, that jurisdiction had a Good Samaritan obligation, which stated if you saw someone being harmed, you had a duty to respond like a Good Samaritan, like a reasonable person. Now, I am going to totally skip over this case for now and do it together with you in class, because acted out, you will never forget the infamous case of Palsgraf versus New York City Railroad, 1928. This was the case that brought to light, actually brought to the center discussion, the issue of proximate cause. Proximate cause is known as legal cause. You also have real cause. If I go up and slap a person, that's real cause. If by doing so it makes a tooth fly across and takes someone's eye out, that's a proximate cause. And you apply the but-for test. But we'll do this together in class. Now, getting back to some of the other general laws of tort, I want to talk about who are others in the class. I don't mean our class. I mean the class of potential plaintiffs. Now, the tortfeasor, the defendant, might send out a tort into society, and they're obligated and liable for all those who are touched by the harm. And we call those people in that class of potential plaintiffs, they're in the zone of danger, right? So if you take the proximate cause and consider it like a radius, and then spin that radius around your tortfeasor, yes, I'm getting very geometric here. It's getting scary, at least for me. You spin that radius, those are the other possible people in the class. Those are the other people in the zone of danger. Let me explain it. If I started flicking matches in 127 Dunleavy, obviously anyone in the class up close is potentially in my zone of danger. But say I come in juggling dynamite sticks that are lit. I don't know why. I'm bored. I don't know. Anyone in Dunleavy is in my zone of danger. But say instead of dynamite sticks, I'm juggling Ebola. I know it's getting nuts, right? Ebola. Anyone who's within basically Western New York, you know, because it spreads, they're all in my zone of danger. Some of the best examples of tort cases come with the zone of danger, like the Dow-Con-Shield litigation. The Dow-Con-Shield used to be I got to make sure I say this correctly, an IUD. Now with the Iraq War, I keep saying IED, and that's an explosive device. The IUD, and what it did, it has caused what's known as toxic tort to the women that use this birth control device. But they found that it had long-term effects on the children born of women that use this device. And they found that children of children who were born might have some issues. So you could see the zone of danger isn't just everybody in real time, but theoretically generational as well. The Ford Pinto is a fantastic example, right? It brought you really consumer affairs. Prior to the Pinto case, we didn't really have consumer recalls and the like, right? The companies would settle out of court piecemeal. Now, with the Ford Pinto, the sad story of the Ford Pinto was that if you hit the Ford Pinto from behind at 35 miles or less, the back bumper would force a couple screws that are in the back, actually nuts, in the back of the bumper, in through the wall of the car and into the gas tank. And of course, metal on metal, spark, gas, boom, flambe. And that's exactly what happened to, you got to read the case. It's not hilarious. People died. Okay. No, it's hilarious. You had, I think it was 4 or 5 women at a Baptist picnic, and they were coming home in their Ford Pinto, you know, after praising God and eating great Southern food. And boom, they were all flambéed inside the car. Now, the worst thing is, we found out later that Ford had already realized that there was a flaw, but they didn't want to call a recall. It would cost, I think it was $1.80 for a rubber bladder, and I think it was just either $16 or $18 of mechanics to replace, you know, to put this rubber bladder in. The idea was hit the bumper, the bolts go forward into the surface or the outside of the car and hit this rubber bladder. No spark. You might have leakage of gas, but you don't have any simultaneous spark. So it would have prevented. And what they had done, Ford, they factored into the cost of the car the potential of litigation. Isn't that horrible, right? And it's really quite funny because, no, not so funny. People died, okay, but it's funny because the vice president, who was well aware of the danger and actually voted with the rest of the group to not make these changes, later becomes president of Chrysler, and he's the one that blew it up in the face of Ford. Why? Ford's a competitor in the market. So yeah, that was real classy. Any case. So this is where we also bring in the idea of punitive damages and the class action suit. You've seen these class action suits. If you turn on any of the secondary level channels, you'll see, a wonderful commercial about a new drug that they found, and you have the doctor with the interns walking behind him. You know he's a doctor because he has a stethoscope around his neck. They have to have that for us, I guess. And, oh, what a wonderful drug, and it has all these side effects, some of them including death, but they say that really quickly, okay? Then 6 months later, you might read something where they have some questions about this drug, right? Questions that I guess the FDA, the Food and Drug Administration, wasn't made aware of or didn't care about or whatever. Then 6 months after that, you have the first case. This drug causes horrible things, right? And then you have the lawyer commercials come on. Have you taken this drug? If so, it could have caused you to, I don't know, flip upside down on your head and dance the Macarena. I don't know, all right? And if it's a very lucrative area of legal practice, law firm after law firm after law firm will join a board. Now, people unaware of the legal system say, this is horrible. Look at these tort attorneys. Look at the costs, right? Well, I would like to go back a little bit. Maybe I'm speaking for the American Bar Association here, but I'd like to go back a little and question, what happened to the Food and Drug Administration? What happened to the companies making sure that the product they put out was generally safe? And if it wasn't safe, this information was made clear, okay? So, you always hear politicians go, we got to crush these large class action suits. Well, what they're really saying is we got to go back to laissez-faire and let companies put out dangerous items into our marketplace, okay? So that was a commercial from the American Bar Association. Now, the last area about class and such is what we'll confront later when we look at strict liability. And we also call that product liability. How do we know how safe a product should be? Well, we look to the marketplace. And I want to tell you the story of the bass boat. Okay? I got great stories here because I love this area of law. What do you have in a bass boat? Well, you got fishing lures and rods and reels and a motor, hopefully, in the back, because if you don't have a motor, this example won't work. And if you're a bass fisherman, you got beer. Lots and lots of beer. Whether it's the best beer in America or Jenny Cream Ale, as we talked about the other day, we got beer. Lots of it. So what was happening was these bass boats didn't have what was called the dead man switch or the kill switch. And what they would do is pull up the anchor, crocked out of their minds after a full day of fishing, whether drinking beer to celebrate catching fish, or just catching beer because they couldn't catch fish, right? So they're, excuse my French, shit-faced, right? They pull up the anchor, they start up the tiller, right? And in getting the anchor or repositioning the boat or whatever, they fall out, pulling on the handle, right? So you have the boat at an angle, probably 60 degrees, 40 degrees, whatever it is. The boat makes one big circle as the fisherman's floundering, excuse the fish pun, he's floundering in the water, right? And boom, the bass boat killed the fisherman, knocked him out, he drowned, whatever, right? So there was a litigation against a person who died this way, against a bass boat company. And eventually they went out into the marketplace and the court looked and said, is the kill switch or the dead man switch part of today's safety level that all products should have. If not, they're liable. And you've seen these things, right? It's a button in the tiller, or there's a key on a stretchy cord that pulls out and turns off the engine, something to kill the motor. Okay? So we look to the marketplace. We also look to the marketplace. How much produce is allowed in a supermarket on the ground? And you'll notice there's always mats and there's always cleanup spots and buckets and all that, because that's the most dangerous part of a supermarket, is the produce. A banana on the ground is the same as a banana in comedy, right? Ha ha ha. But you could really hurt yourself. So there's actually standards of how much product, and more so, how often the produce section must be inspected by the supermarket. And there's more than a daily requirement. It's every hour or every 2, I don't know. I've never worked in a supermarket. But there are standards out there. And how did they get to those standards? Well, they looked at the marketplace, literally, the produce marketplace. Now, a fascinating part of tort law is the potentiality that you could have contributed to your own harm. Okay? And we have two general jurisdictions out there. We have the contributory. I don't know why I have two trains. It's just like they look like they're going on the same track. Anyway, contributory negligence. This is a standard that we borrowed from England. And in England, they have a pure contributory negligence. We used to in certain jurisdictions, but it's all but gone. And in pure contributory negligence, if you contributed as a victim to your own harm, even 1%, you're barred from bringing action. You're barred from collecting. That's pure contributory negligence. In the United States, any jurisdiction that still has contributory negligence, you have to have been the dominant party to have contributed to your negligence. All right? You had to contribute more to your negligence than another person who was the actual tortfeasor. Understand? You're the tortfeasee, but you also are the tortfeasor. And if you contributed a significant amount, you're barred. Now, that was about 3/4 of all the jurisdictions in the United States. Up until about the 1970s, 80s, and it started to shift. And what it shifted to was comparative negligence jurisprudence. Okay? And in these jurisprudential areas, you look for percentages. You look for percentages. The court and the lawyers will say, well, our victim contributed 20%, while the tortfeasor contributed 80%. So say there was a finding against the tortfeasor for $100,000. Well, the tortfeasee, the victim, will only collect $80,000. 20% will be deducted. So it's percentages, percentages, percentages. Okay? So if you see a percentage, you're most likely in a comparative negligence jurisdiction. Contributory negligence used to be 3/4. They're about 1/4 now. Comparative negligence jurisdictions used to be 1/4. They're now about 3/4 of all jurisdictions in the United States. Now, the final issue in tort law is the notion of risk spreading. This is not a legal concern. Is it a practical concern? Hell yes. Is it a concern that lawyers will look for? Hell yes. Is it ethical and legal both? No. We also know the notion of risk spreading as the deep pocket. In other words, you look to trace back, if you can, any proximate cause issues to see if you can trace it back to a deep pocket where you make money. This is not a legal and ethical concern. Is it practiced by lawyers? Hell yes. Okay? but it's not a legal and ethical concern. So, if I do something to you, you sue me in tort, right? Hopefully it's not a criminal offense. You sue me in tort. Hopefully it's not a tort offense. You sue me in tort. Well, yeah, trying to get money out of a Catholic university professor's salary is equivalent to blood out of a rock. So if I'm an agent of the university and acting on their behalf and I harm you, then you sue Niagara University. I'm not telling you to sue Niagara University, but you sue it. You spread the risk out to the holder of the agent, in other words, Niagara University, because they got a hell of a lot more money than this guy does. Okay? Oh, and by the way, I lost the last 2 lotteries too, so don't try suing me. I got nothing. All right, I think we did enough for our purposes, and we will meet in class the next time. So I hope you have a great weekend. And if you have any questions, feel free to email me. You know my email, pjb, or Peter Joseph Baxter, at niagara.edu. Take care. Bye.